So yeah, we're talking about what does it mean to know God's name? I mean, it's a radical, awesome privilege to actually know the name of the God who made the universe. And so we're wondering this month, what does it mean to know the name of God and to use the name of God? What does that actually mean? And how do you do that? The Bible talks a lot about how to use God's name. Since it's an honor to know it, how do you use it? It talks about what does it mean to pray in Jesus' name. Jesus said that if you ask for anything in my name, you'll have it. So we talked about what does that mean. He talked about whatever you do it in God's name. So how do we connect all of our behavior and our lifestyle to the name of God? And today we're talking about what does it mean to share this name. And as we do that, one of the things I think is really important to think about, because everybody knows that if you follow God, you're supposed to somehow represent him or share him, but I think the why behind that is really important. If you know who God is, that knowledge really truly means that you trust him. And when you experience God as trustworthy, that he rewards you placing his trust in him, and when you do, it pays off, you're much more likely to share him than if you didn't. I was reading about a missionary who went to an Asian nation. I can't remember which nation in Asia, but he was translating the Bible into the native language of the local population, and that particular population didn't have a word for faith. It just didn't have a word for it. Like, how do I communicate all the things in the Bible? When I'm translating the Bible, how do I communicate the word faith? And so he's thinking about it, and he's with the elders of this village who are desperately wanting a translation after they believe the gospel. They want God's word. And he took his chair and he leaned back like this. I'm not going to do it very far here because that would be good news for me. He leans back his chair and he's kind of balancing, right? And he says, "What is your word for this? What's your word for balancing? Like between falling and standing. Putting your weight on something and letting it hold you up. What's your word for that?" And they told him, and so he said, "Let's use that word." So there's something about faith that has to do with putting your weight on God and trusting him to hold you up. And the alternative to that is simply playing life by the odds. So today I want to make a distinction between God and odds, or certainty and circumstances. I was trying to find words that had started with the same letter because pastors do that and it makes us feel cool. So certainty, circumstances, promise or probability, faith or factors around you, and just the environmental factors, okay? So God versus odds. It's not totally a bad thing to pay attention to the right-hand side of this. I'll give you an example. If you're driving like I was yesterday and you see the light ahead of you is green, and it's been green for a while, and you think you might have a slight chance of getting through that green if you just step on the gas and go 65 miles per hour for a block or so. You might have a shot of getting through there before it turns red. But my brain starts to work that out logically in terms of the odds of what could happen. Like, however, if it does turn red and I'm going 65 and it is North Dakota and the roads are slippery and that's illegal and whatever, I'm probably not going to be able to stop. That means I'm going to slide through a red light. I'm going to pummel whatever car's in my way. My kids in the back seat probably won't like the experience. So I decided, because of the odds, I'm going to slow down, stop, and obey the traffic laws, right? I'm constantly calculating odds when I'm motoring around on my little mini scooter, right? How do I not crash and burn in the snow on my way to the building? So what route gets me there? Yesterday I was at the dollar store because that's where high-end shoppers shop, and one of the screws came out at the bottom, and I turned my steering wheel, the whole wheel felt like this, and I fell and I grabbed the dollar store shelf, and I'm rattling, because everything at the dollar store is really well weighed, and I'm grabbing the shelf and I'm rattling the shelf, I'm holding myself up, and all the time I'm paying attention to odds. All the time we pay attention to odds. What is dangerous? What is safe? What is worth putting my time or energy into as far as what I anticipate is going to be the odds of a payback of some kind or another? So odds aren't dumb. Odds aren't bad. It's not bad to pay attention to our circumstances, probabilities, and factors. However, if that is where you put your balance, if that is where you put your faith, then God doesn't play a role in your decisions. It's pure probability. Where I live, what I do, what I think, all boils down to logic and outcomes. Versus living by certain things that might call me out to take some risk. If you just go by probabilities, you would not dare have an intimate relationship because you will experience vulnerability, some form of rejection, some form of disappointment. If you just pay attention to probabilities, you're not going to engage deeply in relationships because relationships don't boil down to logic. They don't boil down to odds. They boil down to something that's intangible. A lot of trusting God is illogical. It is looking through circumstances to God's promises, to a hope beyond what we can even see in this world and in this life that's not measurable. And so somehow between God and odds, we find the balance of faith that pays attention to circumstances but does not worship them, that pursues God while attending to the environment around us. And somehow there is faith, that balance. And to give you an example of how this looks, at the very root of the Judeo-Christian faith is the character of Abraham. We're going to look at the Abraham story today. It's a root of the Christmas miracle is rooted in what God promised Abraham to do. But it's a ridiculous promise. Now, if you remember this story, God comes to Abraham, Genesis 12, and says, look, I want you to go to a far-off land that you've never heard of. You don't know where you're going. Just pick up everything you know, grab your immediate family, and start walking. And they walked hundreds of miles to a land they'd never been. Ridiculous. But he does it because God says, I am going to give you offspring and a land that is going to be the promised nation that is going to redeem the world. I promise to save the world through your offspring, so go where I tell you to go. God would bless all nations through the offspring of a childless 75-year-old man. Is anybody here over 75? Do we have any post-75ers? Maybe one or two? All right. Well, you're close. You're kind of close, right? Yeah. So what if God said, brother, you're going to have a baby? What would your wife say to that? And there's a reason that they named their child Isaac, because Isaac means he laughs. It's like, nice one, God. And they laughed at God. So it's like, all right, name your kid Laughter if you don't blame me. And can you imagine what it would have been like, for this elderly couple to hear that God is going to redeem the world through their baby. Not adopted, their baby. The whole Christian faith starts out with a ridiculous promise. God could have taken the most fertile, attractive young couple in the world, and the promise would have made perfect sense, right? Why didn't he do that? Why didn't he go to a blooming 25-year-old couple and say, you're going to have a baby? And they'll look back and go, sounds awesome. We planned to anyway, but good. But to go to a 75-year-old and his wife and tell them something that actually makes them laugh, it's so ridiculous. That is how God chose to start this whole sucker in action. A ridiculous promise that is against all odds. Think of your present circumstances where the odds seem to be against you, and set it next to that. It doesn't look so dark and bleak when you remember that we have a God who loves beating odds. And by the way, it took about 20-some years before God to give this guy the baby, so they're closer to 100 when that little guy pops out. God loves to beat the odds. Now, as this happens, because God entertains ridiculous promises and hope that doesn't measure up to pure logic with us, what he does is he sets up a back and forth tug of war that is the nature of faith. A dance back and forth between humans struggling with probability, odds, circumstances, and factors around them, and a God who promises to get them through anything and to be there no matter what, that they, even though they can't see him or feel him or measure him or anything, that sets up this back and forth tug of war between humans and God. And that is what our relationship is meant to look like. So Abraham, 3 chapters later, Genesis chapter 15, he's starting to get worried. In fact, he's already taken matters into his own hands. He slept with another woman to have a baby that was younger than his wife, to have a baby, just to make sure that he could help God keep his promise. And God says, nope, doesn't count. It's going to be through that old lady. And there's humor all over the place in this story, by the way. And so Abraham is begging God to let some other child count because he just doesn't think it's possible. And so God comes to him and says, after this, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision and said, do not be afraid, Abram. Here's why you shouldn't be afraid. Not, well, the odds are good, or I'm going to do this. Don't worry about the weather's going to be good and life is going to work out. God's reason not to be afraid is God pointing back at himself. I am your shield, I will protect you, and I am your reward. Don't be afraid, God says, because I am going to protect you, and I am going to reward you. This, to me, is so crucial that we understand the difference between worship and manipulation. Now, this next slide is one, if you're a picture taker, grab this one, take a snap of it, share it, or just memorize it, because this, to me, if we work this out with God, this will improve our relationships directly. And here's why. If you have a relationship with God where you feel like it's a little bit of a God, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of thing, you will do things to manipulate God without even knowing it. You will go to church to get something good from God. You will say an extra prayer if something's not going well so that maybe God gives you an extra favor. If the offering plate comes around, you're like, life isn't going very well for me right now. I'm going to give a little extra. Maybe something good will happen. Almost a superstitious version of manipulating reality with magical incantations and behaviors, right? I mean, that's wizardry. That's witchcraft. But oftentimes we play that game with God. Like if I just weave this magic spell, this magic formula, God will be obligated to do what I want him to do. And so here's how that bears out. We have a lot of people in the 90s and the 2000s. There was a wave of abstinence that ran through the church, and what young people were told was if you follow all the rules, your marriage is going to be perfect, and your parenting is going to be easy. And so you do and don't. You don't do this. You stay pure. And you play by the rules, and you behave. What happens is you are going to have a easier marriage than somebody else, an easier adulthood than someone else, an easier relationship with your children than someone else. You're going to kind of get to escape the challenges of life if you do the magical formula of obedience over here. And a lot of people bought into that. A lot of us thought, oh, that sounds pretty good, right? And then life happens and you realize that just because you follow God and obey God, you don't get a free pass through the terms of human life that everybody else has to struggle with. I mean, you have to go through it too. And so a lot of people were taught to manipulate God. A lot of us thought, if I just do what I'm supposed to do now, then God will reward me later. But we realize, and I think this is what the only thing that aging and wisdom can teach a person is that life does not work that way. Careers don't always work that way. If you just do this, then it always works out this way with your career, your job, your finances, your health. If you take the right medications or prescriptions or supplements, you will have a healthy, long life. Doesn't always work that way, does it? And yet sometimes we think that we can manipulate reality. Now, odds are important. Risk factors, risky behaviors, we want to stay away from because it's not good, and we want to maximize our health probability, but when it comes to manipulating reality, our ability is quite limited. And when I start thinking that way with God, it starts to penetrate my relationships as well. So you might go to your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your spouse. You might say, honey, I would love to give you a neck rub because your neck is sore and you want him or her to do that back, right? I'm willing to do this for you, but my unstated expectation is that you'll do it for me when I'm done. So I am manipulating. It's manipulative to do something in order to get something back. Now you can say, hey, can we each do this? That's fine. But to do something in order to get something is just manipulative. And if that person discovers that that's the only reason you did it, they kind of look at you like, oh, I thought you were being kind and you were just trying to manipulate me, right? when we start doing this with God, we tend to do it towards others versus the worship aspect. If you realize what God told Abraham, it changes why you do worship. I'm not here to get magic potions and tricks from God. I'm not here to get favors from God. I'm here to get God. I'm not praying so that God will do X, Y, and Z for me. I'm praying because I want to experience God. I want more God in me. I want more God in my life. I want to experience this God because he's good, and I want more of him in me. And so worship is the opposite of manipulation because I'm not doing this to get anything that I don't already have. I just want more of it in my life. I want God the person, not God's stuff, not God's favors. And when I function that way with God, guess how I operate towards my loved ones? As a person who doesn't have an agenda behind everything they do, who doesn't do the dishes so that they can get out of doing that, who doesn't say nice things in order to get nice things, and who doesn't try to prompt behavior in others through manipulative behavior. Worship is what can free us from manipulating other people. When we come to God just to get more of him, we leave with the satisfaction that we can live non-manipulatively in our relationships. So God is inviting Abraham into a relationship where he simply experiences God and doesn't try to get God to keep his promise and sleep with one woman after another to try to get God's hand to move quicker. He just says, look, I am your reward. You've already got me. Don't live manipulatively to get me to do anything for you. You have me. I'm your shield. I'm your reward. You already have it. But like we said, faith is a tug of war, and Abraham is on one end of the rope, and God is on the other end, and they are tugging. This is what faith is. This is a tug of war. Abraham said, Sovereign Lord. Listen to the honest, raw, rugged humility and honesty that he offers to God here. Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus, not even my kin. And Abraham said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. He is right now challenging God. Did you know that that's okay? Did you know it's okay to face loss or hardship and say, God, what are you going to do? I'm confused. I am angry. I gave a funeral this past week for a mother who died days before her 30th birthday. 2 beautiful young kids and husband in the front row trying to make sense of life. And for my own integrity and for the honesty of everyone in the room and the obvious elephant in the middle of that room, we had to start the sermon by saying, this isn't right. This doesn't seem fair. Life shouldn't work this way. None of us think this is how it's supposed to work. Let's just be honest with this, that I don't understand why God would allow this. And if you're all right with that, God's all right with that. He doesn't need us to understand or even like everything he does. He just calls us to lean against him. See, believing in God, this is another big one. If you're taking pictures, this is another good one. Believing God includes constant wrestling with questions, doubts, and fears. How many of us thought that believing God means you don't have questions, doubts, and fears? And so we thought, oh, I guess I can't believe in God, or I guess I don't believe in God. I worked at a church where one girl was like, I don't think I believe. I don't think I believe. I'm like, what do you mean? Why do you keep coming here then? Like, you clearly believe. You just have doubts like the rest of us. And you just need to understand that it's okay to have doubts and questions and fears. It's okay not to understand everything. It's okay. If God wanted us to understand everything, he would tell us everything, right? But he doesn't. The difference, though, this is, let this sink in. I know people, and I'm sure you do, who have questions, doubts, and fears and turn away from God. They say, I would believe in God, but look at all the suffering in the world. I can't believe in him. Well, there have been big, fat books written by really smart people that explain how that could work. There's all kinds of stuff in the Bible. There's lots of people who've suffered more than any of us have who have figured out how to find joy and trust in God. I talked to a 37-year-old girl yesterday who's been in and out of 42 surgeries in 12 years, who is pastoring churches because she loves God in the midst of her suffering. She just found great joy in God. Her spirit is twice the age of her body because she has found through these hardships great joy in God when everything else didn't work. You can take your doubts, fears, and questions, and you can turn away and say, I don't believe in him or follow him because of this. Other people, like Abraham, turn to him, look him in the eye and say, I don't understand this. I'm upset about this. I'm hurting. I need your help. I have questions. I don't like it. I don't get it. And God can take it. And they surround themselves with people who will pray with them, pray for them, walk with them, struggle with them, cry with them. And guess what? That's faith. That's what it is. The question of faith is not, do you have enough magical power to follow God? It's which direction do you turn with your doubts and questions, to him or away from him? Faith is a tug of war. And God answers him now. He's tugged at God, saying, what are you going to give me? I don't have a kid yet. And God says, then the word of the Lord came to him, this man, Eliezer of Damascus, will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside. This is one of the most poetic verses in all of Scripture. He took him outside and said, look up in the sky. Count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Now, this is not looking up in Bismarck downtown at night and seeing one star in the sky. This is ancient Palestine. No lights. You can see trillions of stars. It's gorgeous. You ever been out of town where there's no light, clear sky, no moon, and seen the stars? You can actually see the belt of stars coming across the sky, which is looking out the side of the Milky Way galaxy, the disk that we are in. Look up there. Count them if you can. And God said to him, so shall your offspring be. If I can hang them in the sky, I can make a bunch of people. I can make an old dude have a baby. It's against the odds. I get that. It's against the probability. It's against circumstance. But I promise. Whenever you doubt that promise, just pull on the rope. Turn to me and pull on the rope. And I'll pull back. See, this has everything to do with why we celebrate Christmas so big and so publicly at the Belmehus. God's big plan is to have a massive, expanding God family of people who aren't related to each other by their own blood, but people who are related to each other by Jesus' blood. And so we do Christmas in a pretty different way. And if you have a smartphone, help us out for a second. I want to give you an opportunity to help God hang more stars in the sky. If you can find our Facebook page, you can do two things. You can make the profile picture on top of our Facebook page your own personal profile picture and find an elementary student to help you with that after church if you don't know how to do that. But you can also scroll down until you find our Facebook event and share it with friends. You can invite friends to the actual event. And it's pretty cool. We have hundreds of people that get invited at the same time just because people open it up in church and do it. Quick directions, search for the surprise Facebook page if you don't know how to find it or don't have it accessible easily. And if you're not Facebook, just listen in and pray for everybody else. Find the Christmas event by scrolling down to it. Then you can just click share as I circled the share button, and you can even write a personal note that gets shared and delivered to all of your Facebook friends that you share it with, and then click friends to invite. And you can invite as many, or you can search for a friend to invite, or you can just go down, it'll suggest a bunch of friends to invite, and have a blast. We love giving you tools like this. I mean, I know that it can be so awkward to go up to somebody and go, listen, I don't know what you're doing for Christmas, but my church is great, and I think you should come. So we want to make it really easy. God says, my family is going to be so numerous, it's going to be like looking up in the sky and seeing the stars and trying to count them, and you can't. And so by inviting folks to experience the story of Jesus, which, by the way, what showed the shepherds where Jesus was in Bethlehem? A star. Beautiful fulfillment. By inviting people to hear that story and hear about the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, we get to participate in what God said was going to happen thousands of years ago to Abraham and help that family grow. We also have at the table out right by the door there, handy handouts where you can do what I did here. My wife and I went to Noodle Zip, and we did a nice tip and put a card there. If you are a crappy tipper, do not put a card in there. It'll turn people away from Jesus. Don't do that. But it's a great way to just share. Jill at the Walrus, I'm sure you've got it decked out with all kinds of stuff every year. Jill decks her restaurant, the Walrus, out with posters and stuff for Christmas and Easter. And so we try to make it really, really easy for you to invite people to participate in the story that God started to tell thousands of years ago with Abraham. And when you do that, you're going to find the stories like this make more personal sense to you because you're helping. You're moving this saga forward. It's like if you go to the movie Star Wars, and I know they had the last one come out really, like you don't have a personal connection to it other than you grew up watching it maybe, but like this story, it's still happening and you're a part of it. God's still adding stars to his family. So God pulls back and makes this beautiful, vivid promise. I mean, Abraham, maybe his neck was too old to crank it all the way back. He might have had to even lay down, do spread eagle on the ground just to see these stars that God's talking about, right? And then it says something else. It says Abraham believed him. And God credited it to him as righteousness. You know what God didn't credit him? He didn't credit him as righteousness for his good behavior. Abraham slept around to try to have a baby. He also, when he traveled with his wife, he told everyone she was his sister so that if someone were to take her into her home, they wouldn't kill Abraham to get her. This was not a super noble dude. God didn't pick the youngest, most fertile couple, and he didn't pick the most noble person you could ever find either. Abraham just leaned against God, and God said, good enough. That's when we say if people want to trust in Jesus, it doesn't mean you're going to live a perfect life. It doesn't mean you have lived a perfect life. It doesn't mean your record is clean. It doesn't mean you're not going to struggle with things. It does mean that you're willing to lean against God and take your doubts, fears, and concerns and turn to him rather than turn away from him. And Abraham simply did that. God said, good enough. I'll credit that as righteousness. God also said to him, I'm the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. Abraham feels God pull. Abraham pulls back. You know what's in the middle of a tug-of-war area? You know what's in the middle there? The loser gets pulled into the what? Mud. Yeah. God's about to make him muddy. He's going to pull back hard. Abraham said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know? I don't quite believe this is going to happen. Even though I believe you, I don't believe you. Believing God, once again, includes constant wrestling with questions, doubts, and fears. Don't set yourself up for failure thinking that somehow I've got to be a spiritual superhero, varsity Christian to be righteous before God. I just need to learn how to go to him with my doubts, questions, and fears. I just got to learn how to not let go of the rope. I just got to learn how to surround myself with people who tell me, don't let go. And God says, good enough. Good enough. That's why we do the lighthouse, by the way. If you haven't yet, put a tack where you live on the map. Declare your home to be a lighthouse, because guess what? We live in neighborhoods where we have no idea what's happening behind those closed doors. We have no idea when we watch the UPS man drop off package after package at our house or our neighbor's home. We have no idea, but God does. We have no idea the doubts, the questions, the fears, stalemates, the relationship pain, the physical illness, the emotional illness. So if you want to be a lighthouse in your neighborhood, put a tack there and grab a slip. It just talks about how do I pray for my neighbors? How do I take a prayer walk and prayerfully saturate my neighborhood and invite God to be God in my neighborhood? And that's why we do it, because we know that we're not the only ones who struggle. Some people have it a whole lot worse, and God starts to open doors for connecting with them and blessing them as we become lighthouses in our neighborhood. Abraham pulls, God pulls. This is a big pull. This is a muddy one. This is my favorite part of the story. So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer. Have you ever had that happen in prayer? You're praying and all of a sudden you hear, bring me a heifer. Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Got that? Okay. Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves. This is a bloody situation, by the way. arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he didn't cut. So he's got a pair of birds, and then half a calf, half a calf, half a goat, half a ram, half a ram. Blood everywhere, covered with blood. Abraham stands there like, now what, Lord? You're like, what's going on here? This was an ancient ritual, not foreign to Abraham at all. He knew exactly what this was. This was an ancient covenant ritual where when you do this, you do it in order to convey a promise. The person who is making a promise walks between the halves in order to make their promise, as if to say, may this be done to me if I don't keep my promise. So, it's interesting. Who's going to walk? Is God somehow going to appear and walk? Or is Abraham supposed to walk through and promise faithfulness to God? What's going to happen? We don't know. So the bloodied Abraham just sits and waits. It says, as the sun was setting, watch this now. Abram, whose name is not Abraham yet, because after God names him Abraham, Ra in the middle, Abraham means many, father of many people. And now he's just named the father of people. Interesting. Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, that's Egypt, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. So by the way, Abram, not only are you going to have to wait 20 more years as a 75-year-old to have a kid, the kid that you have is going to have kids who become slaves for 400 years before I keep this promise. See, setbacks to us seem devastating. But God plans setbacks. And very personally to you, he plans your setbacks. I don't know if he did them to you. I don't know if he simply was aware that someone else was going to do them to you or life was going to happen to you. I don't know exactly how God's mind and sovereignty works, but I do know that he plans on the setbacks in your life. Which, that's going to take some struggling faith to work that through, because it means that God could stop them, and he doesn't. You're going to have to go to him with that. I don't know. You can turn away from him. How could you allow that? Or you can turn to him and say, I don't like that you allowed that, but I still want you. I still trust you. I still balance against you. They might seem devastating to us, but if God plans on delivering you to absolute joy and glory through circumstances that seem devastating, it changes how you face those circumstances, doesn't it? God plans on your setbacks. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen. Now, if you're at this time, for whatever reason, God is symbolized by a fire pot and a blazing torch. So these are two symbols for God here, okay? You just have to know that. That's just historical mark. A smoking fire pot and a blazing torch, that's God, appeared and passed between the pieces. So God is walking through the pieces in this ancient covenant-making ritual. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land. There's a place in the internet called the Lego Bible. Have you ever visited it? I found this Lego story of what happened here. So this is what God is saying. I'm going to walk between the shredded in half animals, the bloodied corpses of these severed animals, and I am going to walk between them, and I am promising you, Abraham, that let this be done to me if I don't keep this promise to you. Lean into me, pull that rope, share your doubts, share your fears, just don't let go, because I will be shredded in half before I will break this promise to you. Abraham had no idea what that actually meant. Abraham had no idea how God would actually keep that promise. But it said, he believed him. God credited his righteousness. Abraham dies. Son dies. His descendants are taken into Egypt at first as their salvation during a drought, and later they became slaves as they became too numerous. The king feared them, made them slaves. 400 years later, God sends Moses. Moses eventually delivers them to the promised land where they become a people. Centuries pass, kings rise, kings fall, sin, problems, failure, hope. Jesus is born. Abraham's offspring, singular, is born. One of the animals that Abraham cut in half was a cow. Jesus just happened to be born in a cow trough in a barn. This kid grew up and taught about God. And at one point even said, before Abraham was, I was. No ordinary boy, no ordinary man. In a minute, we're going to celebrate communion right down front here. That ancient ritual that Jesus initiated before he died, the night before he died. And so interesting how he did it. He took the loaf of bread, which you have a loaf of bread, and at meal you break the bread. He took the loaf of bread, and he shredded it in half, and stood between the halves, and said, "This is my body broken for you." Promise kept. The one who walked between the animal halves, promising that may this be done to me and more if I don't keep my promise to you. May I be shredded if I don't keep this promise to you, now breaks bread and promises that in fact he will be broken in order to keep God's promise to Abraham. So that there might be more stars in his family. That God's great global Jesus family could fill the earth as a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. So as you're preparing for Christmas this year, he's ready. He's ready for your doubts and fears. And Christmas is a painful time for many, many who remember loved ones lost, relationships ended, who remember better times, better budgets, better days, who look with anxiety towards the future. Promise is meant to be extremely bright and beautiful in the dark days of Christmas. When we have pain and suffering immediately before us, but we also have learned, starting with Father Abraham, through Jesus, we know where to lean when times are tough, when times are dark, and we now have a name. We know the name of the offspring God promised to Abraham. We know his name is Jesus, and we have a name that we can share. So share it. And I'm not telling you to share something you don't have. I mean, if your first steps as you leave today is, I need to learn how to lean. I need to learn how to just turn back and say, I'm done just kind of turning away from God and doing what I want and complaining and just giving up when things don't go my way. I'm going to surround myself maybe in a community group or a missional community. I'm going to keep engaging. I'm not going to give up when things are frustrating or confusing. I'm going to learn how to turn towards this God because I realize now that that's what faith is. Faith isn't to pass through all that stuff. It's not a exclusion of all that stuff. It is a promise that God walks through all that because he walked through the pieces. And he walked through death, and he was shredded so that he could keep that promise. He's worth leaning on because he is our shield and our great reward. So as you leave, think about what it looks like for you to lean toward him in your struggles and doubts and questions, what it means to pull on that rope when you don't get something, what it means to surround yourself with people who could tell you not to let go and hold on for you when you don't feel like you even can. And think about people in your life that just need an invitation, that have just maybe been holding out hope for a free pass that didn't come and gave up on that God. Maybe somebody in your life this week needs an invitation. I will save a seat for you on Tuesday. Come listen to the story with me. We're going to talk about a great story, and we're going to talk about a good God worth sharing. His name is an honor to know, and it's worth sharing. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, as we receive the body and blood of our Lord, who walked between the pieces to keep Abraham's promise for us and for our salvation, so that the family of God might grow great and large, we thank you for the honor of playing our part in that story. Teach us how to play it well. Teach us how to lean well, balance well, and pull on that rope when things just don't make sense with the people that you've called to be around us to cheer us on.